So hello, and thank you for speaking with me on behalf of KGL Editorial about peer review. Please state your name, title, and the organization you represent, just so that we have how you should be introduced correct on our video.
Sure. The name is Leonard Jack Jr., Dr. Leonard Jack Jr., and my current position at the Centers for Disease Control is I serve as editor-in-chief of the journal Preventing Chronic Disease. And I also have an appointment as a distinguished research consultant.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So today we chose to speak with you about peer review because we're interested in how potentially your recent diversification of your editorial board might have affected peer review in some way. And so we know that you've recently diversified your board, and we'd love to hear the impact of that. So can you tell me more about that process?
Yes. So I think it's important for people to know that the journal started this process several years ago. So I was appointed editor-in-chief of the journal in October of 2016. And at that time, the journal had less than 10 editorial board members. And it was very clear just from looking at the members on the editorial board that there was very little diversity. And then when you started to dig a little deeper, there are other aspects of diversity other than, for example, skin color that we just didn't have on the editorial board. So this process has been one that has taken several years. And I think each year that we've gone about trying to diversify the board, we learn new things, we gather new insight. Of course, the field itself is helping us to understand some of the strategies that we can undertake. And it just required an intentional engagement, an intentional commitment to set out some goals, objectives that we hope that we can meet on an annual basis. And then I think the last one is to share with everyone what we hope to do, to hold ourselves accountable so that once we put out, the word on what we wanted to do, stakeholders will be very interested in knowing if we maintain that commitment. But it's been a long process.
Yeah, so did you begin diversifying when you first began in 2016, or how long did it take for you to kind of start the process of, hey, we need to add, some diversity to our board?
Yeah, one of the things that helped me to think about why it was necessary to diversify the editorial board was when we took some time to sort of step back and think about what's the purpose, the focus, the mission and vision for the journal. And very simply, we want to disseminate content that is going to position researchers, evaluators, practitioners, policymakers to actually improve the conditions, circumstances, outcomes of Americans, all people. And if we think about it, if that is the goal, then we need to have representation on our editorial board that reflects that. And so it really started several years ago, and it was very intentional, and so we started to look at, do we have diversification, of course, related to race and ethnicity, but did we have diversification in terms of geographic location, discipline, content expertise, sexual orientation, the types of research approaches that people bring to the table, quantitative, qualitative, mixed method approach. And we just started kind of looking across all these different areas. And that's why it's really important, I think, for people to hear that it really requires time, There's that moment when you arrive. I think about 2-3 years ago, I think we started to sort of we've arrived at a place where people could see it, They could feel it. They can read about it in the papers that were being published, that all the work kind of showed up, And people started to acknowledge and ask the question, well, when did you start? How long did it take? So I think it's important to start somewhere with the understanding that there's some quick wins. But in order to sort of institutionalize the benefits of having diversity in multiple ways, it takes time. And I think that one of the outcomes of that is we have seen the journal's impact factor increase. We've also seen the content of papers that come into the journal looks very differently. The authors who generate those papers, that looks very different than it did many years ago. And I think people feel good about that, right? And I think that if we're able to give people the permission to know that it takes time, right? It doesn't happen overnight. I think
Mhm.
then people will understand it's not something you do right away to sort of be able to say to individuals, groups, and organizations that we did something, but it's much more than that. Much more than that. Yes.
Mhm. So it sounds like a big motivation was to represent um, all people
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
America, right? Because your
Mm-hmm.
journal is with the CDC, part of the government publications.
Mm-hmm.
So you're wanting to really represent anyone and everyone. And that definitely
Mm-hmm.
sounds like it took a
Yeah.
lot of intention.
Yeah, it took a lot of attention because, right, we have been dealing with nagging public health issues and challenges uh, in this country and really around the world. We get papers from around the world for a long time. And so it's really important to begin to say, not one group, not one institution, not one discipline, not one philosophical approach holds all the answers to all of these complex issues, factors, circumstances that create these health outcomes that we see, and we've been struggling with them for such a long time. Why wouldn't we want to find out the best thinking from an array of individuals who bring talents, strengths, and experiences to the table to force us to begin to say we need to think about things differently and we need to include individuals that can help us think about things differently, having those individuals at the table. And I think my role as the editor in chief is to be a facilitator of of transparent and honest conversation. That's my role. So my role is to help individuals navigate through tough conversations. And then when we get to the other side, acknowledge the fact that we got there because of the diverse voices, experiences, disciplines that have been at the table. And then everyone can celebrate in offering something new, hopefully to the country, that trickles down not just with our editorial board, but with the kind of papers that we publish in the journal. And then those who are positioned to use that information, I think it then gives everyone something that is more realistic, real world based, science driven, but meets everyone hopefully where they are and find ways to use that content that we publish.
That's amazing. So for somebody, a publisher who wants to start going about diversifying their editorial board, what would you say are maybe some of the quick wins that they could start with, and then some of the longer term goals and things that take quite a bit of development and time to kind of develop?
hmm I think the first thing to do is one of the things that we did was we can make our own internal assessment of how well we think we're doing, not just in terms of diversifying our editorial board, but in many ways. We can make internally, those that sit around the table, make some assessment about how well we think we're doing and what we need to improve upon. Some of that could be influenced by what the field is now really putting in front of us to think about. But one of the things that we did early on is that we brought in an external panel to critique us. And we brought in a panel that was very diversified, had experience in this area and had done this, for many years. And they told us the types of questions that they wanted to ask us, the type of information that they wanted us to share with them, that would give them a sense of how well we've been doing. And I tell you, it's a very different assessment, right, than when you're critiquing yourself. Right, is that when you have other individuals who come in and ask these really tough questions. And so that was one of the things that we did, early on up front. And then we also had to get a commitment from the organization. So if it's a publisher, an institution that's supporting the journal, I think it's really important early on to begin to say, we want to do things differently. We want to feel, look differently, and perform things differently. Can we get your support in helping us to do that? And then identify, ways that won't be too overwhelming, too challenging, where that can come about. We did spend some time up front just thinking about some basic things that we wanted to put in place. So principles of engagement around diversifying the editorial board were adopted, such things such as, right, that we wanted to make sure that the individuals who came on board had the space to give us the feedback that they needed, and not feel as though they're going to be inhibited in any way to actually doing that, and that individuals had an opportunity to really have their voices heard, and that as a journal, we were going to do something with that information, right? So we're not going to just put out a public, statement about how we are trying to diversify the journal. We wanted the experience of those who are coming on board who may not have been at the table with us or in this capacity anywhere else, that they would be given an opportunity to share and provide feedback to us, but that we would actually do something with that feedback. And then the other thing that we decided to do was that no matter where we were along in the journey, we would share with the public where we were. So we started to disseminate updates on the journal's website. We also adopted a column that I call the editor-in-chief column. And in the editor-in-chief column, which is published 3 times a year, we promise the public, our readers, that we will provide them updates on things that we're trying to do a little bit better around. So whatever we said we were going to do, we find a place to actually keep people updated on how we're trying to do that. So in terms of sort of the long-term, impact of that is when we pulled together our editorial board, we wanted them to help us not only look at how we can diversify the editorial board, but give us some ideas and suggestions about how in other areas we can begin to do things a little bit differently. So if, for example, we bring on individuals who have expertise in a particular topic, subject matter area, and they want us to then bring, for example, how do we look at racial, ethnic approaches to improving health, because we may not have had that expertise on the journal before, then we look for places in our feedback to authors where we can provide new guidance on how to submit papers that will honor the fact that we need to look at how we collect data, how we report the data, how we analyze the data, so that it finds a way to be transformed from just words that we should do into real actionable things that get integrated into the many places and processes within the journal. And the editorial board has helped us to do that. And I'll give you a couple of more examples. We also decided that we need to expand our associate editorial board to to do something very similar to what we did with our editorial board, right? How do we diversify the associate editorial board? And our associate editorial board are those individuals who are assigned papers once they come in for peer review. So they are very important in the lives of authors, right? And they make a recommendation on whether or not that paper moves forward. So imagine if for years there was no diversification there, right? And we didn't have individuals serving in those capacity that brought the richness of not looking the same, thinking the same, being trained the same, making decisions on papers. So potentially millions of papers that ultimately get published. Well, we've changed that. So that group started off also with less than 7 individuals, not diversified at all. Now we have over 50 individuals who are serving as associate editors in various lanes of expertise, racial, ethnicity, different lived experiences, all of that now helping to provide authors feedback so that their papers also, right, are reflective of the complexities of life and where we are. But the editorial board prompt us to begin to do that. And they also prompt us to think about, my last example, I have others, but I'll give one more. They also prompt us to think about what are we going to do to create the next generation of editorial board members, the next generation of associate editors, the next generation of individuals who are serving on the journal's statistics review committee. So we've formed now a student scientific writing committee. And these students are from different background experiences, institutions, got different hopes and dreams for the future. And we are modeling with them what we think the world should look like moving forward. So they're going to be learning about the importance of having a diversified group and the benefits of what you get from that in scientific publishing, right? Be introduced to individuals who are doing research in diversified areas, but also being introduced to how the processes of coming together, who comes together, how they come together, how conversations are facilitated, particularly when they're very, very difficult, and give them opportunities to serve in those kind of training roles, capacity in a safe environment. So this new committee has about 12 members. And we're kicking off the committee's activities the end of this month, and then October really takes off. So we have high school students, we have undergrad, master's level, PhD, and postdoc students who are going to teach us, I think, right? I think they're going to teach us some things about how to work, come up and deal with, and offer suggestions, solutions for difficult problems while working with each other, having very different backgrounds, but having the end goal in mind of how can we come together to make the world better, in this case, improve the health for everybody.
Wow. So it's kind of like almost like a reviewer mentoring program, but you're actually asking to learn from them maybe just as much
Yeah.
as I'm going to train
Yeah.
you on how review is done.
Yes.
And it's more
Yes.
of a two-way street, it sounds like.
It's a two-way street, and we are normalizing diversity. It's just gonna be the world early on in their young minds and their young careers, their young hearts, that they will be introduced that this is how hopefully you would want to have around you when you're trying to talk about issues and solutions, sometimes from which you may not have come out of, lived in, grew up in. For anybody, that normalizing that experience early on will get ingrained in a sense that people will want to have others' opinions and perspectives from rigor, from science, engaged in making and coming about solutions, so that when they are identified and they do go out and they are being disseminated to the groups, populations that need them, they would really connect and resonate much more so than if you're working on an island all by yourself. Yeah.
Yes. I love that idea. That's
Mm-hmm.
amazing.
Yes.
So are you pairing them with all of the like each associate editor? Does each associate editor volunteer to be paired with them? Like, how are they being integrated into the process?
That is a fantastic question, because we thought about that, right? So in the beginning, there's some orientation training that's going to occur, right? Why do we do the work that we do in scientific publishing? Why are publications of this sort necessary? What's good research? What's good science? And then how do you critique published peer review process? Behind the scene, what goes into identifying when a paper, what is the infrastructure of a journal? And then we're going to give them an opportunity to critique. We're going to give them an opportunity to even help us think about what are some potential great topics that the journal can take on. We might do a focus issue based on your feedback. What do you think we need to do? And we will pair them with an associate editor when it comes time for them to review a paper, so that they could get the feedback from the associate editor. Along the way, they will be introduced to experts in various different fields who will come to the table, not to do a lecture on, let's say, for example, a certain epidemiological method and approach. They may talk a little bit about that, but we've lined up, I think at this point, like 16, 18 presenters for the entire year who have been given one question, and that is, what were the things you undertook to develop your career, and how can you share that experience with eager, students who are trying to think about what they want to do, and then open it up for question and answers so that they can just have an opportunity to ask these very well established individuals from diverse background and experiences questions about how did you do that? And I think that if we're able to do that, pairing them up with the associate editor, have them to hear and listen to individuals who are established in the real world, giving them some practical on-the-ground experiences, and having them to do efforts and projects together collectively as a group will help them to be able to understand that the world cannot operate within one person, one discipline, or in one geographic location or one institution. We need a bit of it all. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you're providing diversity, equity, and inclusion training, but just using scientific publishing as a conduit for that.
Yeah. And making it real, right? Without ever having to say DEI, DEIA, or any of that, but just it's there, but making individuals aware that we're stronger, and we are able to bring all this intellect, manpower, enthusiasm to the table, but to do it in a way that individuals could come to the table, learn from one another, and then also walk away, hopefully walk away and say that we can't do it again with one individual, one group, et cetera, that it has to be and should be done thoughtfully with multiple stakeholders, viewpoints, et cetera, at the table. Along the way for the journal, we have learned that in terms of utilizing our editorial board and getting their feedback has helped us to think about how we do things differently. And because it's a very diverse group, I have asked them, are we meeting too often? I ask our associate editorial boards, are we meeting too often? And what has been, I think, really rewarding is to hear them say, no, we're not. And I think that is out of the fact that they feel as though they're being heard. They can actually see that information that they're sharing, has made a difference. And I think that the peer review process has gotten better because of that, because we implement their recommendations, and then over time we step back and we try to critique when we've made changes in the peer review process. In what ways does that show up? And one of the ways that it has shown up is the guidance that we give to authors and peer reviewers on how to make sure that our papers are helping to move the field forward. And we've really had to think a lot harder about how do we incentivize our peer review groups so that they can stay engaged, so that they can stay at the table. And I think, like all journals, there have been some things we've done well and some things we need to do a little bit better around.
What do you feel does motivate, for example, your committee members, the new committee? Do you have incentives for that committee? Do you have incentives for your editorial board members as they're reviewing? Do you give any incentives for that, or access to the journal, things like that? Or is it mostly a commitment to just the scientific publishing process?
Yeah, for all journals, that continues to be something that we struggle with. Most journals don't offer a monetary incentive for peer reviewers to stay engaged. Some of the things that we have done in the past is we have, of course, acknowledged the journal's peer reviewers who fall into our top % of reviewers. We put in place a system that we use to evaluate or critique the quality of peer reviews, but we look at the actual content, whether or not it's sound. It really is utilizing our author reviewer checklist, providing sound guidance based on science to reviewers. And we also assess on the timeliness of reviews when they were submitted, and we come up with like a mean score. So those that are in the top 1-2% of the peer reviewers, we recognize them with a formal letter, right? And we also post their names on the journal's website. But I also have been thinking that I want to bring together a group of individuals to think about what else can we do, right? We're thinking about linking their peer review to ORCID, and linking that to the article via the DOI. That seems to be something people have had some experience around. And we also are thinking about how do we let the institution, if, for example, they're in an academic setting, how do we let the individuals in the academic setting know that, one, they haven't been appointed, right? And as well as if they're in that top 1-3%, that we want to recognize them and let their institution know that we want to recognize them. We have tapped and utilized peer reviewers as an audience to help us think about where we should go as a journal moving forward, and have recognized them for that. But I think we all are struggling in this space, right, of how to figure out ways to keep our peer reviewers, engaged. And journals who had a cost associated with their journal would offer free membership. But because we are a federal journal, our content is available for everybody. So even our viewers will have access to that. And the one thing that we had to do a little differently, we would use the system. Scotland wanted to send out reminders to peer reviewers to review papers. And then we got some pushback from peer reviewers saying we're getting too many of these. So we had to go back, scale that back. So that they're not getting reminders. They're all committed. They will get to it within that time frame, but a few reminders, but not too many reminders. They felt as though it was a little bit aggressive. But I think that, we're all trying to figure out how to keep them all engaged and make sure that we acknowledge their work. But they, of course, as you know, a very important part of making sure that a journal content is solid, and we need to figure out ways to keep them engaged and to incentivize them and reward them.
So are you using editorial board members as reviewers often? That's your kind of main?
Often. Yeah, we do. And our ask of them is to review no more than 3 papers a year. And the reason for that is we tap them for so many other things that we wanted to make sure the total overall experience of our editorial board is one that they feel is a good use of their time, right? And that we're not overwhelming them to do too many things for us. I think for our editorial board, I am just more focused and concerned on them giving us their honest, transparent feedback so that the journal can continue to get that honest feedback, make the different adjustments and changes in how we do our work so that we can stay relevant to the field and agile to make the kind of changes that we need in order to stay relevant and a reputable resource to the world.
So when you began in 2016, it sounded like the number of board members, or was it associate editors, was quite small. You said something like seven members. So today, how has that number changed, and how are you finding engaging the number of people? Is that a challenge?
Yeah. So it has increased. I currently don't see it as being a challenge because we come together twice a year as a group, rich agenda, where we share updates and get feedback. I think the value of the editorial board has been to have the ability to communicate with a subset of members around a given topic based on their interest, expertise, training, lived experience, that I may at times have sub-conversations, side conversations around what do you think, how should we move forward? And sometimes that's individual emails that may go out, and sometimes that's individual telephone calls, conversations much like what you and I are having here, where I would ask for that feedback. And And that's why I was saying early on, I think the role of an editor-in-chief as being a facilitator and a convener of knowledge, information, experiences, particularly when you're trying to do it from a perspective of engaging previously underrepresented voices at the table, when you're trying to also facilitate bringing diverse ideas and perspectives together, that there has to be a convener who has the ability to understand the past history experiences and in some instances trauma and mistakes, along with interacting with others who may not have had a more integrated, diverse experience. Someone has to be able to understand that context and then also understand where we are trying to go, and also be able to hear where there's progress, whether slow, big, small, acknowledge that and give kudos and congrats along the way. And then at the end, be someone who can then help the entire group understand what just happened. Let's talk a little bit about how we got here so that they will understand that there were these moments when we were trying to do something different, felt a little odd, a little tough, but we got through it. And when we do that, we end up having better papers. We end up increasing and improving the peer review process. We end up having individuals serve in capacities as guest editors that they've never had an opportunity to do. And we had to go through all of that. And we're ending up seeing the number of papers increase. We're seeing the number of citations increase. We're seeing that the impact factor is increasing. That all these things happen when there is a commitment and someone there to kind of navigate everyone through the process. I think it's very important. But the number of people I have felt, because of the area that we're dealing with multiple chronic diseases, multiple states, age groups, that we needed to have that kind of number. But a part of engaging people is having the skills to do things that require group dynamics, team building, bringing people together, dealing with conflict, helping people to understand when we're dealing with difficult topics, what to do when you're in that place, how to communicate your feelings, emotions, and, feedback in a way that people can hear it. And I think, though, that is the reason why when I've asked, are we meeting too often? That people feel like, no, it's not, because I feel like people are learning something beyond just the rigors of the scientific content, but they're also learning people dynamics, how we get through this. And they're often asking questions about, you remember when we did that exercise? I took that back to my place of work and we modeled something different to engage different people. But it has been, I think, really rewarding. And I don't think the number of people have been overwhelming at all, at least not to me.
That's
Yes.
amazing. Yes, that sounds like a very useful skill set for
Yeah.
this type of work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you mind
Mhm.
sharing how many board members you have, or?
Sure, sure. Right now we have close to 30, and that's about for the editorial board. That's about the number that I think feels most comfortable for us now. Again, moving from about 6, 7 in the past to about 30 now. Our associate editorial board moved from less than 5 when I came on board, and now we have over 50 associate editors. Um, we brought on board a statistics review committee, and that committee looks at papers that present very advanced statistical methods and analysis. That group was a group that I started when I came on board. Actually, we started it even more recently in the last 3 years, but that group reflects a lot of the diversity topics that we talked about today. And that group has about 30, 35 members on it. And then our student advisory board, as I mentioned before, we're starting off with 10. We're going to learn from that and decide if we need to go up, bring it down. Yeah, so the numbers range, and they range for various different reasons.
Great, thank you so much. So I know we're pretty much out of time, but I did want
Sure,
to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions and then one
sure.
final future question. So are you using any AI powered tools for expanding your reviewer pool in the future?
We are, like, for example, just nothing really deep at this point, right? But we do like to have authors to provide us feedback on their areas of expertise. And we are using the tool in the background that help us to screen those individuals from time to time. And we put out a position statement around AI. And I have to be honest, I need to learn a lot more,
Mhm,
right? To really feel comfortable to what extent I'm going to utilize, AI in what capacities. There are some of my colleagues who feel we need to do more. We can't ignore it, but I'm going to say at this point, not very much. Yes. Yes.
Okay, excellent. And then just a quick question, kind of going back to training reviewers. Do you have any sort of training videos or just orientation portal,
Mhm.
something that people can just access at any time beyond
Mhm.
their training, in real time with people
Yes.
part of the journal?
Yes, we do. And we try to revise that for our peer reviewers. One of the things our peer reviewers have asked us to provide to them is we took some time years back for each of the article types that we have is to provide to authors a checklist on what makes for strong paper. We've even provided training videos on how to generate tables, how to generate figures, and our peer reviewers have asked to make sure that as soon as we update that, and we update that annually, that we provide that tool to them because they use that to also do their assessment of a paper's strengths and weaknesses. And then we have also more recently come up with Wednesday tips where we may find that we see observations across peer reviewers, things that they're doing right. We want to elevate that, make all the peer reviewers know. So we'll create these very short, sweet vignettes, messages that goes out to our peer reviewers to let them know what the tip for that Wednesday may be, or it could be something on the other end, right? Where we're seeing some things we don't want them to do, right? And we want to give a tip. And so we're doing those things as well. But providing ongoing training, connection with the peer reviewers is really critical.
Mhm, absolutely. Okay, well, kind of last question, really
Yes.
quickly. I would love to know sort of the future, like how are you continuing year after year to keep the editorial board and the people involved in the journal diverse and representative, and sort of what does the future look like for your journal and peer review program?
Yeah, right. So um, I'm just finding at the very top, right, is um, connecting intentionally with our peer reviewers. And I don't think I'm going to offer anything that's going to be earth shattering or new. But what I am going to offer, and I thought about this, is the reality of what it takes to create a diversified editorial board, associate editorial board, all the other volunteer groups that we have. And it really comes down to creating an environment that will honor the training, the field experience, the live experience in real time. We can structure that in many different ways. But to really create that environment requires more than just putting a calendar invite in place. It requires more than just having an agenda. It requires more than just posting the faces of individuals on an individual organization's website. It really requires a very intentional, engaged, honest, and sincere ways of engaging groups of individuals and utilizing what they bring to demonstrate that voices collectively can be heard and translate into action. And so no matter what we take on in terms of an activity, if those tenets are there, I think that it helps to make the journal more trustworthy. It helps to make the journal's content resonate in ways that it may not have in the past. And I think it also is a good way to show good. And I, like I said, don't know if I have anything that innovative other than the fact that if those things are there and they come from that place of sincerity, I think that it just has a domino effect on a lot of things. I think people who haven't been at the table, groups that have not been at the table, stay, right? They get more engaged. And then the word gets out that they're very sincere about diversity. And I think that it has just rewards for those who have limited time to be a part of the experience, to feel like it was a good use of their time. So I think that's will be, um, the bigger thing. We can always talk about what we can do, for example, is to shorten the review time for peer reviewers, how we can do it. But that right there, I think, is at the core of why we're doing what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, I love that. Creating
Yeah.
a safe environment, a healthy
Yeah.
environment for these things to kind of grow naturally out of. I really love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
well, thank you so, so much for speaking with me again and providing this very valuable information for other publishers, for peer review week. And, yeah, really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your insights.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It was fun.